The floor is yours.
Thank you, and happy Valentine's Day to everybody. I'm Martha Kirilidou. I'm Senior Director for the ARL Statistics and Service Quality Programs here at the Association of Research Libraries, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the ARL Library Scorecard Initiative webcast. A couple of, I did notice I made my first. Don't you love this? Okay, thank you for joining us. And just a couple of things, logistical things. Everyone will be muted to cut down on background noise. And we do welcome questions. Please type your questions. There is a Q&A section. And Raina Balby, our precious organizational development consultant, will stand ready to answer all of them during the webcast. Questions and answers that we do not address, as well as the ones we do address, will be distributed to attendees after the webcast along with the recording. Now, a little bit of background on why ARL has an interest in this area. ARL has as a strategic outcome the mission of building assessment capacity within organizations and supporting individual growth in this area for improved alignment of strategy and metrics. And we have been engaged in building a community of practice around library assessment activities. Many of you know that we have a successful biennial library assessment conference. We also have other tools and community initiatives. LiveQual is probably the most widespread and groundbreaking tool. But we do have smaller scale projects like the Balanced Scorecard project. And that's what we are going to focus on today. The speakers of today's webcast are Winston Tabb, Dean of Libraries at Johns Hopkins University, Ted Jackson, a consultant we have worked with from Ascendant Strategy Management. Liz Mengel will speak next, and she is the head of collection management at Johns Hopkins University and will tell us a little bit more about their effort there. Vivian Lewis, representing the McMaster effort. Steve Hiller, Director of Planning and Assessment from the University of Washington. And our last speaker, but not least, Betsy Wilson, Dean of Libraries at the University of Washington, in addition to myself. The agenda for the webcast, we're going to just cover very briefly some background, and then we're going to jump into the leadership perspective offered to us by Winston, coming from Johns Hopkins University. Ted Jackson will offer an introduction to the Balanced Scorecard for those who are not familiar with it. And then Liz Mengel will delve more into the Johns Hopkins effort and how they transformed their scorecard there. Vivian will offer us the perspective from starting from scratch, and Steve Hiller will emphasize the importance of planning and the importance of strategy maps in this process. Now, Ted Jackson will come back, and he will emphasize aspects of communication and the importance of strategy review. Because once you developed a balanced scorecard, it is a live document, and it needs feeding and care. And then Steve, Liz, and Vivian will come back again, and we'll specifically talk about their measures and how they communicated those at their institutions. And again, at the end, we'll have the leadership perspective from Betsy Wilson and the story from the University of Washington. Now, as time allows, we may have Q&A, but as you can see, there's a lot of interaction on the agenda, and if we do not answer your questions, please be assured that we will provide an answer to you after the webcast in writing. Now, very briefly, as a background, this effort has some roots and some historical roots within ARL. Back in 2001, there was an ARL OCLC Strategic Issues Forum. It was entitled Toward Rethinking Academic Library Performance in the Digital Age. It took place in Arizona in February of 2001. And it was at that forum, as Jim Self will tell you, it was at that forum that he was exposed at the Balanced Scorecard framework. And Jim Self is the person at the University of Virginia that has worked with the Balanced Scorecard there for a number of years. And he has published, as you can see from the article we're citing in this slide, he has published on their efforts there. The University of Virginia effort has been a really exemplar case, and many libraries have looked at it over the years, wishing they had something like that. Now, as we were listening to those libraries, wishing they had a balanced scorecard like the UVA one, we thought we should take some action. And in 2009, we offered an ARL Library Scorecard pilot program that included 4 libraries. And we did that program in partnership with the Ascendant Strategy Management group. And the 3 of the 4 libraries are on the webcast here with us today: Johns Hopkins, McMaster, and the University of Washington, the 4th one being the University of Virginia. Those 4 libraries spent the last couple of years exploring the Balanced Scorecard, as you will hear at the webcast, but there are also a couple of other resources that are useful for you to review. In the fall of this past year, 2010, we had a panel presentation at the Fall ARL Forum on the effort of these libraries, and there is an audio from that presentation that you can also enjoy. There's also a paper that will be published in the Library Assessment Conference proceedings. It was presented by Louise Hiller, Mengel, and Tolson in Baltimore at the Library Assessment Conference this past October. Now, we do want you to consider this webcast also as an invitation to participate in another effort that we want to initiate with a new cohort of libraries. So as we move forward, keep that in mind. In the evaluation form we will give you at the end of the webcast, we are asking you if you are interested in being part of a community effort like this one. Now, without further ado, I want to move on to the first speaker, Winston Tabb, who's going to offer us the leadership perspective from Johns Hopkins University. Winston?
Thank you very much, Martha. I appreciate being invited to participate in this, and welcome to everyone who is listening today. I would reemphasize what Martha just said, that this is leadership perspective from Johns Hopkins. While there are many similarities among the various plans of the Balanced Scorecard, and probably many of the same reasons for wanting to join in, I think it's important to stress from the outset that while there is a certain methodology, that the results will be very different based upon what different libraries really see as most important for them. And we are all both alike as well as different. So I thought I would talk today about 3 different kind of general categories, as you'll see on the slide, the rationale organizationally, institutionally, and then generally the benefits that we've seen thus far in our relatively short experience with the Balanced Scorecard. I think it's really important for all organizations occasionally to step back, to pull themselves up short and think about what they're really doing. Too often, perhaps, we've done that through refreshing, and I put that in quotation marks, so refreshing strategic plans, quite tedious, often very little attention really paid to them, but just updating and not really thinking from scratch. So I thought it was very important for us to really step into a new direction, and the Balanced Scorecard seemed to be a great opportunity for doing that, because it also required us to develop a very clear capacity in assessment, which is something which is seen in too few of our libraries. Very important for us to be creating a data-driven and transparent decisions, because I find it's quite often the case for librarians for all of us to feel that we're doing good work. We're doing the Lord's work, so why should we have to measure it, and why should anyone really care or even challenge us about that? And in fact, it is important that we're doing good work, but how do we define what is good? And more importantly, how do we let our customers know what we're doing, and how do we know what they consider to be good? I should say also that part of the context for our entering into the Balanced Scorecard was thinking of this not as the only thing we were going to be doing along the lines of assessment, but we also almost simultaneously were joining in the ARL LibQual and ClimateQual programs as well. So we have assessment going on at many levels, and this is one of the things I should just say by the by that I think has been very, very useful to us, to be thinking not just in one form of assessment, but in multiple ones. So what was particularly important at Johns Hopkins institutionally that made this, even if it was a wonderful idea in the abstract, really very important for a point in time for this institution? One of the most important, the high-level changes that we've had here. And I know now that I've been in academia for a while that this is more common than not. But what was very interesting, I've been at Hopkins now for a little bit over 8 years. And for the first 5 of those years, there was almost complete stability at every level. The president, the provost, the vice president for finance, and one thing very important to mention for us, the deans of the 4 schools, like arts and sciences and engineering, that directly fund the libraries because we get no central support. So we have had now in the last 3 years 2 presidents, 2 vice presidents for finance, at least 4 provosts, some acting, some more or less permanent, but not exactly, and altogether at least 8 different deans for the 4 divisions. So quite a number of people to be dealing with. So new people coming in and asking questions that were very fundamental about that required to have more definition of assessment. But perhaps one of the biggest goads to our moving more dramatically into the Balanced Scorecard was the fact that during one of these iterations of provostship, we had someone who was a biostatistician. And every question that I got from him really related to data. So this was one of the very strong motivations for us. The question also then is how to demonstrate value to people who may not understand libraries or who may feel that value can only be demonstrated through numbers. Now, I must say this is not the only approach. One of the most interesting experiences I had in a budget meeting was when one of the deans asked why were we even trying to measure anything. Everyone just knew that libraries were good and you couldn't have a good university without a library, so why bother? But that was a very, very lone voice. Most of the other people were very, very strenuous in their demand that we be able to quantify what we were doing and how we were doing it, and most particularly how we planned to do it better. And then, of course, we had the beginning of the economic crisis where Hopkins, like many, many universities, was losing an endowment, losing in its funding, and all of us were being forced to take reductions and therefore to think more carefully about where the real value was and how we were spending our money. So what have we seen thus far during our relatively short time with the Balanced Scorecard by way of benefits? I think clearly the most important one is bringing focus. And I mentioned earlier about our general tendency to believe that whatever we're doing is good without really evaluating what good is and what is better and what is best. People want us to do lots of things, but quite often the library staff would say this, that so-and-so wants me to do, or the faculty want, and not to be able to say which faculty wanting what and how much is this going to cost was really quite an impossible situation for us coming into this economic crisis. We often then would go into the kind of kitchen sink mode, which is something that the Balanced Scorecard will absolutely prohibit you from doing. A second really important part, additionally to bringing focus and deciding on what are the most important things and what are not so important, is engendering a kind of departmental cooperation, so that the way that the map works actually begins to show how all the parts of the library work together in a much more holistic way than we may have been used to thinking about. This is still an area where we have a lot of progress to be made, but I think just mapping it, the very visualization of the way in which the map works, has really helped to break down some of those silos. The idea that the mindset change being that we are part of a whole, and that all of us may be part of a general priority, but that there are some certain things that we'll be doing in certain years where there is no one will be involved in a particular priority. Some people may never be involved in a very specific priority, but we're all still part of the library and involved in the overall mission. So one of the critical parts about the Balanced Scorecard, I think, is talking about both the mission and the values, the overall objectives, as well as the very specific measures and initiatives. And then finally, the last thing I would just say from a personal point of view, I think it's just good sometimes to try things new and get people refreshed. And that's one of the big benefits I think we've seen thus far from our organizational transformation into the Balanced Scorecard. We'll find out how successful we've been among our peers when we have a full day refreshing ceremony this coming Thursday. And we'll be looking not only at how well we've done, but what we need to do next. So that's basically the Hopkins experience up to this point. Thank you.
Well, Winston, thank you for trying it starting 2 years ago. Now, I do have one question, because I know you're going to leave us, and we won't have you here for the rest of the webcast. What would you have done differently to improve and strengthen the effort from the very beginning if you knew what you know now after 2 years of working with the Balanced Scorecard?
Oh, I think the major change I would make from what we did before is I would have forced us to have fewer objectives and fewer initiatives and fewer priorities. I think it was a transition from kind of doing everything to trying to identify and limit, but I think we were way too timid about this, and one of the things I'm hoping will come out of from our session on Thursday is a decision to really focus and refocus even more narrowly on the things that really will be most transformational for the library.
Great. Thank you. I do hope your Thursday session comes, with fewer objectives, if you wish, and better ones, the sharper ones. Now, we are going to have, for those who are not familiar with the Balanced Scorecard, we're going to have an introduction by Ted Jackson, who has studied under Norton and Kaplan, the two people that developed the Balanced Scorecard. Ted?
Thank you, Martha. I thought I would quickly kind of introduce some concepts behind strategy and its application to the nonprofit world, and then go directly into some of the principles of Balanced Scorecard. So, I mean, one of the questions, we get quickly is why would I, introduce a Balanced Scorecard, and what is the purpose of it? Well, the purpose is to help you execute strategy. Well, is that really a problem? Well, we see that 9 out of 10 organizations fail to execute strategy. And looking behind that, you can look, why is that? Why is that most organizations fail to execute strategy? Well, it's because, only 37% say they have a clear understanding of what their organization is trying to achieve. Only 1 in 5 people feels enthusiastic about the team's goals and their organization's goals. Only 1 in 5 people say they have a clear line of sight between their task and their organization's goals. And then only 15% of people feel like their organization fully enables them to execute their key goals. Well, what do we do with all of this information? I guess if you were to think about this as a soccer team, maybe only 4 of the 11 players on the field would know which goal is theirs. 2 of the 11 players would actually care. 2 of the 11 would know what position they're playing and what they're supposed to do. And most of the players would, of course, be competing against each other, against their own team members. So it's not surprising that a soccer team, this team would probably lose all 10 games. But it's not surprising that when you think about strategy, most organizations fail to achieve what they lay out in their strategic plans. But don't despair. The odds can be improved. They can even be improved in the nonprofit space. So looking at some nonprofit organization, Duke Children's Hospital was able to drive up parent satisfaction while at the same time they were driving down their cost per case, driving down their length of stay, driving down absenteeism of many of their employees, and driving up their net margins. Well, why would a nonprofit want to drive up their net margins? So they can invest more into the hospital to make it a more state-of-the-art place. Also below that, you see Fulton County Schools. They were able to drive up SAT scores while driving up parent satisfaction and continuing to do well in state test scores. Hillside Family of Agencies, a social service organization, reduced the wait time, shrank administrative overhead, and extended their revenue growth, which allowed them to, of course, extend the services that they offer. And Canadian Blood Services, they were able to increase donor satisfaction. Imagine these are the suppliers of the blood. And increase hospital satisfaction. These are the consumers of the blood, while increasing their red blood cell yield. So almost doing a process improvement along the way. So there are a lot of great results that you can get. All of these organizations, of course, are Balanced Scorecard organizations. So when thinking about, how do you execute with the Balanced Scorecard, we've tried to boil it down to a three-step process. First step is, where are we going? So what is our purpose or mission, and how do we describe our strategy on one page? So what we call this a strategy map. So what is it that we're trying to accomplish? Then the measures, how do we know that we're achieving this strategy? So what measures have we put in place? What targets, what level of performance are we looking for? And then this responding piece, how do we review and revise our information? How do we look at our initiatives that link back to our measures and help us close the gap? So I'm going to talk just for a few minutes about this plan piece of it, this strategy map piece of it. And then we'll hear from the experiences of some of the people in the first cohort. I will then come back and talk about some of the measures and the response piece of it. I thought the best example maybe to use would be Teach for America. Most people are familiar with the organization, right? So they were started in 1990. It was actually a thesis at Princeton, Wendy Kopp, about placing highly qualified college graduates in underserved schools. But quickly they kind of outgrew the startup phase. The schools where they were placing teachers were complaining about, a lack of preparation, poor lesson planning of these core members, they called them, these teachers. And the teachers themselves were also complaining about a lack of support from Teach for America. Quickly after that, a job recession hit in. So Teach for America was overwhelmed with applications. No Child Left Behind created the complexity or complicated the ability for them to take these core members or these young teachers and place them in positions. And then they looked out their alumni, people that had taught for 2 years, were saying, well, what kind of impact can we have on education? What is the broader mission that we're talking about? And this caused Teach for America to define kind of who they were. They said, we need to really be able to communicate in our organization and to funders and core members kind of who we are. So they came up with a statement. We want to improve the prospects of low-income youth today and tomorrow by training and placing highly qualified college graduates in at-risk, low-income, urban and rural schools. So what does this mean? They further define this by creating a strategy map. This is that one-page picture of the strategy, right? And so in this strategy map, we're able to see perspectives. These are the different colored layers here, where ultimately they wanted to have a social impact, right? That's improving the prospects of low-income youth, and then on the right-hand side, impacting tomorrow's low-income youth. So the one on the left side is about teaching to the kids today, and the one on the right side is about changing the education system. So how were they going to do that? They looked at their constituents, this blue area. So we need to have engaged core members, those were the teachers, remember, and we need to have motivated alumni. They said, what do we need to do well in order to make sure we have engaged core members, motivated alumni, so that we can have the social impact that we're shooting for? But we need to be able to grow the core member base. We need to be able to enhance their effectiveness, and we need to be able to catalyze or to motivate this alumni movement. So in order to do that, they needed to have their financial house in order. So the finances were there to support their strategy. They said we need to grow and diversify our revenue base and to demonstrate good financial management. If we can do these things, it will allow us to recruit more core members, create a system to force these core members or force ourselves to enhance the core members' effectiveness. And by demonstrating good financial management, we'll show our alumni that we're a good place to invest your time and spend your energy with. So then they looked down at the bottom there and said, well, what do we need internally? What kind of people and culture and capabilities do we need? We need a more diverse team. We need to have effective managers. We need to have a technical capability to allow us to expand. We need a national board. We need a true expansion plan. We cannot just expand opportunistically. So this map became the way they were able to view what they were focused on and allow them to focus in there. So let me quickly jump ahead and say, when you're, where would a research library start? They want to build a purpose statement. Purpose statement has an objective, similar to the vision statement, a quantifiable goal, then an advantage, the statement of differentiation, and then a scope or a targeted market segment, where they are. So, we look forward to say, well, how would this work in a library? So, at UVA library, how did they go through this process of defining their objective, advantage, and scope, or this purpose statement? They said, we are here to enable research, teaching, and learning through services, collections, tools, and spaces for the faculty and students of today and tomorrow. So this put the foundation in place for them to create their strategy map. And again, with most library strategy maps, you have the mission at the top, and then the customer perspective, the financial perspective balanced, the internal perspective, or what do we need to do well in order to make our customers happy, meet our financial obligations, and then learning and growth at the bottom there to think about, in order to achieve this mission, what do we need internally. So I'll stop there. I'll come back in a few minutes and talk about the measures and how they actually, report from there.
We're going to come back to you, Ted, in a while, and I'm going to save at least one question for you for that time. Let's move on to Liz, though, who can give us more of the Johns Hopkins perspective. And Liz?
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. So the good news is you don't have to scrap your old strategic plan to move into a balanced scorecard. Depending upon your learning style and your organization's learning style, it may be helpful to have something that is familiar as you move through the process so that you can kind of concentrate more on the process and less on all the other stuff that you may want to be thinking about. So like Winston said, if your organization is anything like ours, you'll have to try to work to keep your strategy map and your balanced scorecard kind of simple. And in a minute or two, I'm going to show you how our strategy map evolved over the course of the last couple of years. So one thing that I feel is really important and really necessary to do while you're starting this process is to really take a good close look at your current strategic plan and see if it actually is strategic. How tied is it to your mission, your vision, your values? Or is it just a list of actions and projects and some data that was easy to capture at the time? How well does your plan link to your broader institutional plan, your mission, et cetera? And then be really honest with yourself about that. If it's not, it's not. It's not And it's not anything to beat yourself up about. Just kind of move on and figure out how you're going to put things where they need to go. So the advantages of using your existing scorecard is that people are familiar with it. Your big goals or objectives or whatever you want to call those are already familiar to people. So you'll probably have more discussion on where they fit in the Balanced Scorecard than on the things themselves. So the disadvantage, and it's kind of a big one, is you're probably not going to be letting go of any of the sacred cows that you've been dragging along with you for, perhaps years and years of your strategic plan. You're not going to have that time to be reflective about where you are and where your organization wants to be. So one of the things that happened when we were doing ours is, and I'll show you what it looked like in a minute, is that we had to get to the point where we called that old strategic plan a historical document. And it took Winston actually saying that in a meeting before people let go of that old document. So the other thing that I can give as a bit of advice is, as Ted and the consultants would work with you, really listen to them about how many objectives and measures you should have. This is one of those things where more is not necessarily better. So now we'll do a quick run-through of the evolution of our strategic plan. And here you can see this was like our 2006 strategic plan. It was a 20-some page document, all this dense, all those words. So on the next slide, it's our first strategy map. And I do kind of feel like a grandma that you have to end up sitting next to on a plane where they pull out all their pictures of their grandkids. This is, our first strategy map, and we were so proud of it. But as we go on to the next one, so this is October 2009, and you can see that it's changed a little bit. Mostly it's we received a big $20 million NSF grant that needed to be somewhere within our strategic plan. So that came on, and we've kind of color-coded things and kind of grouped them in different ways. So if we go to the next slide, you can see we took a big kind of conceptual leap here. And I try to tell people, it's because we're Hopkins and we're very theoretical, and so these kinds of concept things work very well for us. But it's still the same thing. It's the same kind of 4 different perspectives with objectives underneath them. For whatever reason, this really helped people on our staff understand the idea of the strategy map much more so than the kind of squares. So I don't know what our next strategy map will look like when we do our refresh, because like Winston said, we really want to start focusing. So this may change completely again, but I think one of the things that Ted and Laura from Ascendant told us, and we took very much to heart, is that you have to make it work for your organization. So for us, this worked.
Thank you, Liz.
You're welcome.
This picture works for Johns Hopkins. Now, as you worked within the ARL community with McMaster and the University of Washington and the University of Virginia, how important was it for you to have that community as you moved forward?
It was absolutely vital. I don't think we could have done this on our own. I mean, certainly you can go and you can read about the Balanced Scorecard. There's tons of books out there. There's tons of articles out there. But I can't tell you how many times in meetings I would be able to go, well, McMaster's doing it this way, or Washington's doing it like this, or Virginia's doing it like this. And then suddenly people would back off a little bit and be okay. So without them, I think we would have been really stuck. Plus, we really did bounce a lot of ideas off each other on the way we worded things, or how we were looking at things, or how we were approaching getting management on board or getting staff on board. So we were able to use a lot of each other's ideas, and it And then actually, too, sometimes you just need someone to whine to that's going through the same thing and is able to kind of, say, don't worry about it. Get back on that horse and keep riding it. And that's kind of invaluable.
Thank you. Vivian or Steve, do you want to say a word on that question about the importance of the group before we move on to your part, or do you want to address that part as we move on with your sections?
I think we might address it. Oh, pardon me, Steve. I would just say that I think I'll cover some of it in my remarks later on, so I'll leave the floor to Steve.
Yeah, I would just say that not only was it interesting to see the process, but also we began to see a number of similarities, particularly as we looked at some of the objectives for each of our institutions, which are quite different, but of course we're all research libraries. And those objectives and looking at potential measures, I think, has real promise as we move forward with this and coming up with maybe a suite or basket of measures that can be used to look at teaching and learning, for example.
Thank you. Vivian?
Great. Thank you very much, Martha. McMaster's experience was slightly different. And as the title of this slide indicates, we elected to start from scratch. And we did it with enthusiasm. McMaster, unlike some of our partners in the initiative, did not, and I'll be the first to admit it, have a robust assessment program prior to entering the program. We had just named our very first assessment librarian, and historically we had filed all of our ARL statistics and very rarely did anything with them. And I'm sure many of the people that are on the call this afternoon would probably admit to being in the same experience. As well, McMaster had a strategic plan. In fact, it was dated August 2008, so it was relatively current. And we had a good mission and a vision and a value statement, but the plan itself was unmanageable. We had, and brace yourself for this, we had 7 strategic directions, which is fine. We had 24 goals, and we had 67 initiatives. And for an organization of approximately 100 staff, it was just well beyond what we could actually accomplish. And the problem, as Liz was indicating, that in many ways our existing strategic plan was an unfiltered laundry list of ideas and hopes. And everyone in our staff wanted to see themselves in the plan and were wholeheartedly volunteering for all sorts of activities just to see themselves there. And many of our objectives were really, in retrospect, unattainable. And many of our initiatives that we had identified as part of this planning process were unresourced. As well, there was a limited alignment between our mission and our initiatives, and perhaps one of the most difficult problems was that no one actually owned the planning process. There wasn't a group or an individual that was really overseeing the plan. And finally, there were no real metrics attached to that plan. So for us, the Balanced Scorecard initiative was a much-needed solution to our strategic planning and performance management woes. And as my slide indicates, we have discovered a huge number of upsides to this as an approach. We've discovered that in our particular environment, it was very liberating to just start again from scratch. And as well, we found that the Balanced Scorecard framework provided a level of discipline and direction that we didn't have originally. It was a question of following the steps and arriving at someplace good. As well, we discovered that the scorecard process forced us to be more balanced in our approach, because it forced us to focus not just on the user and not just on internal process, which was probably our inclination in the past, but we were focusing on financial health and the learning and growth of our own staff. As well, the Balanced Scorecard approach forced us to establish strong alignments between our initiatives and our strategy. And perhaps most importantly, it's forced our leadership team to talk about strategy at least once a month, 11 months out of the year, and I'll talk to you more about that later. The interesting thing is that although we intended to throw everything away and start from scratch, when we look back in time, we discover that our top-level big think ideas, they all did port over. But in addition, we've got that greater sense of clarity that's really making the organization feel that we're heading in a good direction. And so I'm very pleased to report, if you can flip to our next slide, you'll see that our scorecard includes 10 strategic directions, 25 measures, and only 13 strategic initiatives. And so for us, this is great.
Yeah, the next slide here is for Steve, but maybe it'll be in the next section when you're coming back, Vivian.
Certainly.
Steve, would you like to tell us about the planning and the importance of strategy maps?
Well, thanks, Martha, and thanks to everyone who's attending the webinar today, and greetings from the West Coast. At the University of Washington Libraries, we've been doing strategic planning for 20 years. We had our first plan in 1991. It was at our own initiative. There were no university mandates or university strategic plans. And our five-year plans produced a number of successful initiatives, including the user-centered library and the Anytime, Anyplace library that are cornerstones of our programs and services today. But over time, the process for creating each new strategic plan took longer, was time and labor intensive, overly detailed, and tried to get every activity in program included. As was previously mentioned by Vivian, everybody wanted to see themselves in the plan, which made for a very long and detailed plan. And it meant that the strategic part was often overwhelmed by the number of goals and objectives, and the links with oversight, execution, and measurement were weak. In fact, many of our staff began to see strategic planning as an exercise that was separate from and not tied to their ongoing work. They weren't actionable, some of the objectives, and they weren't measurable. So in 2008, we began looking at other organizational planning and performance models that would help us accomplish some of the following. Truly be strategic. That is, focus priorities and choices. Spending less time on process and more on strategy and defining those key areas that we needed to pursue and could be aligned with organizational capacity and resources.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Okay.
Dora, just a little bit, maybe the mic comes closer to your mouth.
We also wanted to be sufficiently nimble and agile to adapt to environmental, economic, and institutional changes. A 5-year plan we felt was too long in these times. We wanted to integrate our planning more closely with our long-established assessment program, where data had been used to inform programs and services, but not necessarily linked to measuring progress on goals and objectives in the strategic plan. And we wanted to connect ongoing operations with our strategic priorities and key objectives. About the same time, the university also started a series of strategy and performance initiatives, which Betsy will discuss a little bit later, so the timing was propitious. We jumped at the opportunity to participate in the scorecard pilot as it held much promise for addressing those areas that we were interested in improving. And our scorecard and map have essentially become our new 2000 and, if I can change this here, yes, our new 2011-13 strategic plan called Building Sustainable Futures. And while it's still somewhat in progress, you can see this is up on our public website, and the strategy map is at the heart of it. And looking at our strategy map, what we tried to do with our strategy map is build out our key objectives, or list them there under the 4 perspectives. And as we build out those objectives, those who work most closely in those areas will develop the actions, outcomes, and suggest possible metrics. So we think our strategy map concisely shows who we are and where we want to be, both to our staff and the campus community. And you can see our mission and strategic directions, frame the perspectives and objectives, and actually are represented in the key objectives. And we have a firm foundation of organizational values underlying that.
The strategy map is a great communication tool. And Ted Jackson will. Do you cover the organizational values, Steve? I just want to make sure.
Yes.
Okay. And Ted Jackson will tell us a little bit more about how the strategy map can work as a communication tool, and also the importance of the review process of a strategy map. Are you with us, Ted?
Okay.
Yeah.
I am, Martha. Thank you. And as I said before, we moved from the strategy map, and those were three great stories, and you saw certainly how organizations have adopted the strategy map to meet their needs. But behind each map, and these organizations will tell you, are a set of measures. And as Winston said in the very beginning, the key is to keeping this simple, but also to make sure that you have measures behind kind of each of the perspectives. And here we are back at the Teach for America example. And I will just quickly state, they looked at, kind of how they were making gains with the students, what the satisfaction rates were of their core members, how many of their alumni were attending events, how they were doing with growing revenue, and how they were doing also with staff diversity. And so those are just a few of the examples, but on this slide here, you can see that all of their objectives have measures behind them, and then all of their measures have targets, or they set expectations for a level of performance that they were trying to achieve. Now, I'm sure any of my co-presenters will tell you that they probably do not have targets for all of their measures today, but it is that effort of trying to say what is the level of performance that we're looking for that is important. Because once you have these, your map with measures and targets behind it, you can start the process of trying to answer the question, how am I doing in executing on my strategy? And so I thought I would quickly show you an example of how you would do a strategy review meeting. So it's starting with the map, digging into the problems, and then looking in detail at some of the objectives, measures, and even initiatives. So let's go back to the map itself for Teach for America. We can look at this map. Even though it is small and probably not even legible on this page, you can see that the left-hand side has a lot of yellows and reds. So think about these as traffic lights. So we're having problems over here on this side of the map, whereas the right side of the map is all green, and so things are going well. So you take your areas where you're doing poorly and you dig down into them, a discussion with your leadership team. And you say, okay, so how are we doing? Let's look at our measures behind our objectives and then be able to do some analysis behind that. So we say, okay, well, we can see here it looks like we're doing okay, but we're not quite there at that level. So now let's look into even the initiatives. So what are the projects that we have ongoing? And how are our projects supporting this strategy as well? And so it's just a really nice way to be able to, simply start at your strategy or your strategy map and drill down into some of your measures and even your initiatives. So let me give you just a simple example, right? So starting on the left-hand side of this page with the chart, we look at the chart and we say, oh, wow, our measure dropped. I wonder why it dropped. And let's move to the right-hand side, these yellow sections. Well, the drop, when we do more analysis, it seems to be coming from a particular population. And why do we think it has come from this population? Well, it looks like we changed our teaching style to meet a new standard. Okay, well, that is pretty interesting. So what should we do about it? So let's make a recommendation. Well, we need new teacher training for our middle school math teachers because we think that will help increase our performance in the future. So imagine if you had this kind of information with your leadership team for the several key areas of your strategy where you are struggling. And so this would allow your leadership team to have a good discussion and then to make good decisions and to either, adjust your initiatives, maybe do things differently, maybe communicate differently to your employees on how they should be making changes, or even just change some processes as well. So I know this was a flyby, but imagine having your strategy on one page and then being able to discuss and even answer the question, how are we doing in executing our strategy? I'll turn it back over to you, Martha.
Thank you, Ted. And, ARL has a sort of a reputation of asking people for data and metrics, and we have a platform, the StatQual platform, now where it offers a gateway for people to have access to the ARL statistics and live call and DigiCall and Minds for Libraries and Climate Call. And we are also working on the Leap Value Agenda, which is a 3-year IMLS grant. But ultimately, all of these measures need to fit into a strategy that's important locally for each institution. And the presenters will, at the next section, will address how those metrics are becoming important at their libraries and within their institutions. At ARL, we do also have an effort to realign some of our traditional metrics. The ARL Statistics Survey, for example, is undergoing a review process, a 2-year review process, to make sure that we revamp it in a way that asks those questions that are important for the digital library, for the new services that libraries are developing. One of the questions we did receive from our participants, and as we are going through the next section, I hope Liz and Vivian and Steve will try to integrate their perspective, is the question of aligning your library scorecard with the university planning process. I know Winston touched a little bit on that with the leadership transformations they had at the university level, and as they were getting administrators from hard data scientific fields, those administrators wanting hard data from the library. But Betsy will also address it to some level. But Liz, Vivian, and Steve, if you could also incorporate some of that perspective in your presentations. So let's move on into the measures with Liz Mengel.
Okay. I'm going to just say it one more time. Just for, is your strategic plan strategic? And if you're going to be making and creating these measures, you want to make sure that you're measuring something that is actually strategic rather than just some other operational activity. You need your operational statistics to run your department, but that doesn't necessarily mean those measures have to go on your strategy map.
Liz, if I may, and this strategic approach also speaks to the alignment with the university goals, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, certainly you want to be able to look and see what's important to your institution. Or, I don't think none of us operate we don't operate in a vacuum.
Yep.
So yes, you have to be able to align with that. I think one of the things you're going to need to know right from the beginning is you are going to get the very dramatic, what we do is intangible and it cannot be measured. And you have to be able to look at the people who are telling you that and in your probably very best Obama voice say, yes, we can. We can measure those things. There are ways to measure intangibles, and I actually found this really great book called How to Measure Anything, Finding the Value of Intangibles in Business by Douglas Hubbard. And so when I'd get that question, I would simply give people that book, and then they would go away and actually try to figure out how to measure some of these things that are intangible. But be prepared that you will get everything we do is so intangible. Again, like Vivian said, at Hopkins, they didn't have a big assessment program at McMaster's, and at Hopkins we didn't either. So we kept a lot of our ARL statistics, but we really didn't do anything else with them. So when we went to start creating measures, it was really having a lot of discussion about, well, is this measure really measuring something that's real? And we had Martha and Steve and Jim Self from Virginia come in and do the assessment, the ESP, the Effective, Sustainable, Practical Assessment of our assessment programs. And that helped us a lot in understanding where we were in terms of being able to work with data and collect data. So we really had a lot of discussions about do our measures measure something real? And, if you're spending all your time collecting data, then you're probably not actually doing anything else. One of the other things that we discovered was librarians' love of words, and words and words and words and more words, and wanting to be able to use words to create a measure. And words are lovely, but you're going to have to graph that at some point. So knowing that you're going to have to be able to say, well, how are you going to graph that? How are you going to graph that over and over again is something you probably want to be prepared for.
Thank you, Liz. Pictures are definitely worth 1,000 words. There is a nice picture coming into sharp focus. Vivian?
Yes, that's right. And for McMaster, this concept of coming into focus was huge, and I would just like to share a few thoughts with you on that. I've already aired McMaster's dirty laundry. We didn't have a robust assessment program. We did not collect a lot of data besides what Martha asked us to file with ARL or CARL, or Canadian Association of Research Libraries. And so when we went down this route, we did get some concern from people within our organization that some of the measures we were talking about doing weren't good enough. They weren't crisp enough. And I found that in some ways, the way to break the logjam was to describe what we were doing as first generation. And that, yes, this is not the perfect measure. This measure, we admit, does not get at the full outcomes of this activity, but you have to start somewhere. And forcing people to start somewhere, I think, was quite liberating to our project. The other piece I wanted to share was this concept of coming into focus. In many cases, we started this process identifying measures. It all looked pretty simple until we actually started trying to collect the data and actually do something with it. And it wasn't until that point that we really understood what that measure was about, and we had to refocus several times. Invariably, all of our measures started in one place and moved 20% to the right or to the left, and that's okay. We turned up at the end of the day of our 25 measures only using one that directly links to an ARL statistical survey item, and that one was related to teaching and learning. We did find that we were linking into LibQual a fair bit and to ClimateQual, which we have not yet actually done. So it's a measure where there isn't any data there. If you go this afternoon and visit the McMaster University Library's website and click on either statistics or strategic planning, you will come to our full scorecard, and you will see everything that we have. You will see the measures that we've identified, the formulas that we are using, the targets that we've set for ourselves, and the actual data that we've pulled in so far. So I encourage you to take a look, and hopefully you'll get some value out of it. In terms of the university planning process, we discovered that the areas that were of most interest to our university were around the teaching and learning piece. And so as we go forward with our scorecard, we know that that's the area where we need to bring into crisper focus. So it's work yet to be done. And I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Vivian. And Steve, here a picture of UW measures. Steve, are you there? Right. Maybe he's trying to get his
Can you hear
phone.
me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Oh, okay.
You were trying to get it out of mute, right?
So for the pilot, we decided to work with our 2006 to 10 strategic plan and chose 12 key objectives out of 86 for developing the outcomes and measures. We wanted to make sure we had at least 2 for each of the perspectives. And we did rely heavily on our assessment data, especially those on usage, customer needs, and program effectiveness to develop 15 measures that use a mix of ongoing or existing data and some efforts to come up with new data. So we wanted to measure what's important. And what's important can mean different things to different people. We defined it as what is important for our customers to be successful and what is it important for our stakeholders to know. So in that sense, we're looking at some of those planning areas at the institutional level. And then we also looked at what data do we have already and don't need to either find new data or to replicate. So this is a slide that shows, I think, about half of our measures. It fits on one slide, so that's what we have. Perspective, measure, target, and results. And we used a mix of survey data, automated gate counts, article downloads, and so on. And what we were looking at were, again, what's important. Vivian mentioned the teaching and learning. That was a critical piece. We needed to come up with a measure, and we didn't really want to use number of instructional sessions. We were looking at really the connection that the library had to teaching and learning. Use of physical space, that's, I think, very important message for our university administration to hear, that that space is used, that the number of entrants coming into our libraries is increasing every year. Digital delivery services was another area. The library's contribution to research productivity, and so on. So we wanted to see, one, whether we had existing data. In fact, we did from our survey information. And 2, that we were hitting the right sorts of things. So what did we learn from all of this? Whoops, got down too far, sorry. Whoops. They warned me not to do this on my own.
Well, let me...
See what happened.
It happened to me in the beginning, don't worry.
So what did we learn? We learned it's really important to define your outcomes. If you don't know where you're going, it's really hard to measure where you are. And in doing so, like Vivian mentioned, we actually refined part of our question and our objective and process. There were many ideas for new data, especially those that could demonstrate outcomes or change the success and user behavior. But the time and effort involved in defining and collecting this data was substantial, if it was indeed possible at all. And we have a golden rule around here, and that is never put more effort into getting data than the data is actually worth. We also found that a mix of frequencies of data work better in an academic environment. A lot of it was year to year or term to term. Didn't really look too much at month to month. And with a survey cycle, we try to balance the need for timely data for organizational improvement with avoidance of survey fatigue. And so we have a 3-year cycle. Finally, keep your metrics reasonable, attainable, and manageable. Remember that strategy is the driver, not the metrics. Metrics inform. And fewer metrics are better. Don't succumb to the danger of over-metrication. Thanks.
So this is Liz, and seeing Vivian aired McMaster's Dirty Laundry, I'll air some of Hopkins' Dirty Laundry. Now, Steve mentioned that they had 15 measures. On our current Balanced Scorecard, We have 55 measures, which is absolutely ridiculous. But that's one of the things that we want to focus on this year is really cutting those down. And I think once you start working with Ascendant, they'll give you some kind of good goals for both how many measures you should have and how many objectives you should have. And I listen to them because it really makes sense. We had 55 measures. We have 150 staff. You can do the math and figure out what's going on there. But so how many managers can dance on a strategy map? We had a history in our organization, too, of operations being strategy. So everyone wanted to see their name or their department's name on the strategic plan, even if they were simply doing a project that was routine. There was a feeling that if I'm not on the plan, then what I'm doing is not important and not valued. Not every department is going to be on your strategy map, and I think we've talked about that before. We talked a little bit probably in our organization about how do you build a strategy map? Do you build your strategy from the bottom up or from the top down? And I heard this a lot when we started moving to the scorecard, that we used to always have ideas bubble up and that people thought that this strategy planning process was more from the top down. But it really depends. It's depending on how your organization works. If you're able to have things bubble up, then that's probably a good way to start gathering some ideas. However, one of the things we really found out is that strategy is a business of leadership, and your leadership has to be the one setting those kind of big visions. If you're going to be the one working on getting the Balanced Scorecard going on in your organization, you have to be willing to get out there and kind of proselytize about it. You have to really push to get people to convert their thinking and to see this as a benefit for them. The scorecard is as much about organizational change as it is about metrics, and you'll need to talk the heck out of the program. Organizational change takes time, and it's more time than you would probably actually ever believe. Even though we set up a schedule for strategic meetings at the objective level, it took almost 6 months for those meetings to become routine with people and for really good discussions about strategy happening. So it's not a simple process, but it's a process that you can work through. But it does require organizational thinking change, and that's not always an easy thing to have happen.
I think, to some extent, we were thinking that McMaster, having Vivian, who's an organizational development person, they had a natural advantage because of her experience in OD. Vivian?
Yeah. Oh, I have one final thing to add for our staff. Finding their place on the strategy map, it was one of those things that people had a hard time doing, and we were actually this past year going through replacing our performance management system, and so we came up with a new performance appraisal system where all of staff's goals have to tie back into the Balanced Scorecard. So that actually took managers having to get to know the scorecard well enough to be able to explain it to their staff to have that tie-in. And I think that really helps staff understand the scorecard a lot more.
This is definitely a new level of application. It's going to be interesting. So we look forward to learning more from your experience there. Vivian?
Yep. At McMaster, I can safely say that we inundated our staff with opportunities to talk with us about the scorecard. And our team joked that when we walked into the room, people would run and hide because, oh no, here comes those scorecard people again. And we had sessions with the staff at each step of the building process of that scorecard. But I thought I would just draw your attention to two events that have happened at McMaster in the last few months as we've rolled out publicly the scorecard. So in November, we offered what we described as a staff strategy fair, and this one was actually focusing on the strategic initiatives, which were of great interest to our staff. And the format of that event was 1-minute thunder talks by the leads of the 13 strategic initiatives, followed by a fair-like booth set up in a large room where the staff could walk around and ask questions of each of the leads of the strategic initiatives. Very successful. As well, a few weeks later, we offered metrics workshops where the first clump of data had come in through the scorecard. It had been published on the website. No one had had a chance to really look at it, though. And we gave the staff an opportunity of actually looking at the data themselves and imagining that they were sitting around the leadership table. What would their impressions be of the trends? What would they think the next steps should be that the library should take? And it was a great experience for our staff. If you flip to the next slide, you'll see the calendar that we'll be using at McMaster for strategic planning and review of our scorecard. And we've been doing this for a little while now, but every year we roll through the months, and you can see from September through April, we do 2 rounds of strategy review with the leadership team. And so you'll see round 1 between September and December, round 2 between January and April. At each of those meetings, we review the data that's come out of the scorecard. We look at the initiatives that are linked in with that scorecard. Are we meeting our targets? What do we need to do to make sure we meet those targets? And then our commitment to our staff and to the campus community is to offer in April workshops around the objectives, measures, and initiatives linked into the scorecard. And then culminating in sort of a full refresh that would be released in July around an all-staff meeting so people can see what the end results were. So there's an input process there. Keep in mind that at McMaster, as the leadership team is reviewing the scorecard, all of the results are posted to the public website. So it's fully on view, not just by the staff, but by anyone through the internet. And that's really all I needed to say there.
Vivian, we received a very interesting question about playing to the metrics rather than serving the objective. Is there, and you know, maybe you and maybe Steve, who follows, can also address that issue. Is there a danger that you'll try to sort of focus on the metric to the extent that your objectives are not really well served?
I think there is a risk, and I think that's probably an inherent risk of this process, and that's why I think it does need to be carefully fed and cared for by the leadership team, so that we don't drift into that process. And I think people that have been using a scorecard for some time have discovered that there is a tendency, if left unchecked, that they might start making decisions that are based on the metrics, and they've lost the forest for the trees. So it is something that we are aware of, but we haven't experienced it as yet so early in our scorecard history.
Thank you, Vivian. Steve?
Yeah, and I would say that we need to remember that most measures are really indicators, that in a sense they are indicative of something that is evaluating the particular progress or achievement that you're making an objective. But whether it measures it directly, very rare to find that. So you have to have a really fine-tuned metric, really, to do that. Talk about managing the process at UW. Well, fortunately, we didn't need our heavy hitters back there, Ichiro and Godzilla, to help manage the process, although they're still on the bench in case we need them. We tried to actually normalize and regularize this process, to use existing opportunities and venues to keep staff informed and involved, especially during the first year. Our last organizational climate survey showed that staff expected leadership, library leadership, that's primarily our cabinet, to set the vision and direction for the libraries, harking back to what Liz said at Hopkins. And while staff certainly wanted to be informed, they felt it was more valuable use of their time to focus on changes in responsibilities and workflow related to strategic priorities and actions. So we used a lot of existing meetings, as I said. We took our cabinet retreats. We made sure that we had covered strategy development and establishing our vision, strategic direction, and priorities in those, actually added another half-day cabinet retreat to focus on strategy. We used our managing council meetings to discuss scorecard concept and focus on strategy. The dean's town hall meetings, which at this time were more budget-focused because of our budget situation, but we tried to connect our strategy with budgetary planning and changes. Dean's annual all-staff meeting also served as an excellent venue for putting this into a broader perspective and context of the year ahead. So we tried to not make it as separate as people perceived in the last few times that we've done it. But, of course, we did have separate meetings and other things with people as we went forward as needed. So where are we now? I think we have a much better convergence of strategic planning assessment that better positions us internally and also in working with the university, and I think we'll talk a little bit about that shortly. We've established a process for executing our strategy, including building out the key objectives, managing and tracking the process, using some groups like our strategic group, our assessment and metrics team, having the cabinet take responsibility for the overall process. And we've seen our strategy act as a powerful tool for framing and communicating building sustainable futures for both internal as well as external audiences. And I guess more importantly, we understand that this isn't a one-and-done effort, but really embracing the strategy map and the scorecard is an ongoing process of improvement. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. And Betsy, are you there with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Yes, very well.
Oh, fabulous. Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm just delighted to share with you how we've integrated the Balanced Scorecard initiative into institutional processes and planning at the University of Washington. But first, let me give you a little bit of background and some self-disclosure. As a library dean, I draw every day on our assessment work to communicate the library's impact, our resource needs, and our new capacities and capabilities. I see the Balanced Scorecard as another powerful tool that we've added to these capabilities, and really one that allows us to knit many of our assessment approaches together. So we have, in essence, developed a decision support system that advances our work and ultimately the work of the university through explicit criteria and metrics. The Balanced Scorecard is an indispensable tool for the University of Washington libraries in good times, but especially in bad budget times, which I know we're not alone in facing right now. I really cannot imagine being an effective or responsible library leader without our assessment program. I kind of like to think of it as I would be walking a tightrope without a net if I didn't have the assessment program. It initially would be quite exciting, but it would ultimately be foolish and perhaps even deadly. So I really, my self-disclosure is I am very much committed to assessment programs at universities and libraries, and the Balanced Scorecard is really a powerful tool. As Steve indicated, we began building a robust assessment infrastructure in 1992. I can't believe how time flies. And we did that in order to help us define and propel what we called a user-centered library. So when the leadership at the University of Washington in the last, I'd say 2 years, began calling for more data-driven planning and resource allocation, we were way ahead of the game, and we were looked to as a model across campus. In fact, I think it was last October, I was asked to share our work as an exemplar with the Board of Deans and Chancellors here at the University of Washington. I also want to note that, coincidentally, there were some other leaders on campus, and I think where the leadership comes from is a really interesting observation. The other units at the university that were leading this type of work, Balanced Scorecard type of work and assessment work, was the Provost's office, which is our Chief Academic and Budget Officer, the Central Administrative Services like Facilities and Finance, and, not surprisingly, the College of Engineering. So to borrow from Lorcan Dempsey, who is the OCLC Vice President for Research and has a wonderful way for coining phrases, we have a lot of acronymic density when it comes to initiatives at the University of Washington that are relevant to our webcast today. So we have 2Y2D, ABB, PEI, OEI, and WDDIM. So let me tell you what all those letters mean and why I think they're important for us and relevant to the conversation today. 2Y2D, which is not to be confused with R2D2. For us, it stands for 2 years to 2 decades. This initiative was launched by our then provost, now interim president, Phyllis Wise. And 2Y2D initiative, its goal is to articulate long-term strategic priorities that will guide near-term decisions. It asks what we want the University of Washington to be in 20 years when most of us won't be here anymore, and then works at the near-term level, the 2-year level, to make that vision a reality. A centerpiece of 2Y2D is the creation of what is called a sustainable academic business plan that will respond to the immediate budget challenges that we have and then strengthen our shared academic mission as we move out into the 2-decade horizon. It guides decision-making at the near term, and it focuses on practical ways to make our existing resources go further, looks for creative ways to increase our revenue, and then invest strategically in that future whenever possible. There are 3 major initiatives that are data-enabled and mapped to the Sustainable Academic Business Plan, and that brings us to our next 3 acronyms, ABB, PEI, and OEI. ABB stands for Activity-Based Budgeting, and it is a method of budgeting that is new to the University of Washington, but it is which activities that incur costs in every functional area are accounted for, so data, once again, analyzed and then linked to the mission and the strategic goals of the institution within the framework of 2Y2D. The full costs of programs and services are then more transparent and available to help with planning, budgeting, and decision-making. We're just in the second year of a soft rollout of this budget model, during which this time we're only using new incremental tuition revenue to be allocated according to ABB. In 2012, it will be the full rollout. The second acronym, PEI, stands for Program Evaluation Initiative. And this is really an ambitious initiative, which is to develop a standardized system for program evaluation across all the schools and colleges and the libraries included in that. That will inform budget decisions in academic units based on 2Y2D priorities. The goals of PEI are, 1, to gather information that will facilitate informed decision-making, and once again, the libraries is so far out ahead on this where we have a lot of information already gathered and being used. And the second is to serve as a baseline for an ongoing annual program evaluation process. And finally, the third acronym is OEI, and that stands for Organizational Effectiveness Initiative, and it is focusing on increasing effectiveness and efficiency while decreasing costs of administrative and support functions. And while the libraries is really focused on the program evaluation initiative, there is much that we have to offer to the OEI as well as benefit from. So OEI has a lot of tools and templates and resources to help units improve work processes over the next 2 years in order to position us for the next 20. And its operating mantra is rapid, transparent, data-driven, accountable, and holistic. And finally, my last acronym, WDDIM. What difference does it make? The Balanced Scorecard approach makes a huge difference for us, especially as our institution takes metrics, criteria, and planning seriously through 2Y2D, ABB, PEI, and OEI. The stakes are high, and the scorecard reduces our collective risk. The scorecard has allowed us to internally and externally develop, test, and convey our strategy. It allows us to map to institutional priorities. It drives meaningful metrics that matter. It pinpoints value in demonstrable ways, and it allows us to tell our story. In a time when competition for attention is especially fierce, and I count the attention of my provost and our stakeholders, we really need succinct and compelling ways to convey value and impact. And I think there is no better device than a good story to do that, and a story that's backed by data, and a visual or two is even better. So let me end with a short story. Last fall, I had an hour to brief our new interim provost on everything she needed to know about the UW libraries as we entered into perhaps the most challenging budget year yet. So what were my options? I could talk really, really fast. I could give her reams of papers, which is normally what I would do. I could overwhelm her with our glowing survey results. I could do a really whiz-bang PowerPoint. But instead, I pulled out our strategy map and I gave it to her as we sat down for our hour together. She took it in her hands, she scanned it, she pointed quietly to a couple items knowingly, and then after a minute or two, she looked up and she said, yeah, I get it. Now, she is a really fast learner and incredibly astute, but I credit the strategy map and the Balanced Scorecard initiative with honing the library story that it could be easily and quickly comprehended by a wide variety of stakeholders, including the provost. So her line of, yeah, I get it, was music to my ears. So WDDIM, what difference does it make? It makes a world of difference for the University of Washington libraries and the institution that we serve. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Betsy. Yeah, we get it.
Yeah.
I think we're there. I'd like to thank all of our presenters, Winston Tabb and Ted Jackson and Liz Mangel and Vivian Lewis and Steve Hiller and Betsy Wilson. We will be sending you more information on how you can participate if you want to a new cohort of libraries for the collaborative community-based project again for the 2011-12 academic year. And you can always reach me on this email, martha@arl.org. Enjoy the rest of your day. Happy Valentine's Day. Bye.
Thank you. This does conclude today's webcast. We thank you for your participation. You may disconnect your lines at this time and have a great day.